Darkness enveloped Daniel as the lantern's light sputtered out. His ragged breaths echoed in the small cabin, mixing with the suffocating silence. He fumbled in his pocket, retrieving his flashlight, and clicked it on. The narrow beam revealed the empty cabin, or so he thought. A shadow moved in the corner of his eye. Spinning around, Daniel's flashlight landed on the ghost. It stood unnervingly still, its empty eyes boring into him. For a moment, neither moved, as if caught in a standoff. "What do you want?" Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. The ghost tilted its head, the movement sharp and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Slowly, it raised a hand and pointed to the journal still clutched in Daniel's hand. Daniel hesitated, then flipped to the next page. The writing had changed, no longer faded and old but fresh. As though written moments ago, the words read, "Leave the cabin, run. It doesn't stop until it gets what it's owed." The ghost's grin widened, its blackened teeth glinting in the flashlight's beam. Daniel's grip tightened on the journal as he backed toward the door. With one final glance at the ghost, he bolted outside. The woods felt alive as Daniel stumbled through them, branches clawing at his face and roots threatening to trip him. His flashlight flickered ominously, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist into grotesque shapes. Behind him, the laughter began again. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more guttural, as if the forest itself were mocking him. Daniel refused to look back. As he ran, he spotted a glimmer of water through the trees, a river. Desperate for a way out, he headed toward it. If he could follow the river, maybe it would lead him to safety. The ground grew softer beneath his feet, turning into mud as he neared the water's edge. But just as he reached it, his flashlight flickered and died. "No, no, no," he muttered, smacking the side of the device. In the darkness, he could hear the ghost approaching, its wheezing breaths growing louder. A splash interrupted his panic. Something or someone was in the water. Daniel squinted into the darkness, his eyes slowly adjusting to the dim moonlight. A figure emerged from the river, its movements slow and deliberate. For a brief, hopeful moment, he thought it was a person. "Help me," he called. The figure didn't respond. As it stepped onto the muddy bank, Daniel's hope turned to horror. It was another ghost. Its waterlogged skin hung loosely from its bones, and its empty eyes glowed faintly in the dark. The two ghosts began to close in on him, their movements eerily synchronized. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them. Not in the dark, not like this. He remembered the journal's warning. It doesn't stop until it gets what it's owed. "What do you want?" Daniel screamed into the night. The ghosts paused, their heads snapping toward him in unison. One raised a bony hand and pointed toward his chest. Confused, Daniel looked down. Hanging around his neck was a pendant, a family heirloom he always wore. Daniel tore the pendant from his neck, holding it up in trembling hands. This is what you want." The ghosts didn't respond, but their gazes remained fixed on the pendant. Desperate, Daniel hurled it into the river. The pendant hit the water with a soft plunk, sinking out of sight. For a moment, the ghosts stood motionless, their eerie presence almost fading. But then, the wheezing breaths returned, louder than before. The ghost from the cabin stepped out from the shadows, shaking its head slowly. "It's not enough," it rasped. Daniel realized the pendant wasn't the answer. It was a clue. He remembered his grandfather giving it to him, along with a cryptic story about an old debt their family owed. "Never lose it," his grandfather had warned. It's your protection. Now, it seemed the pendant was the very reason the ghosts were after him. The family debt wasn't protection, it was a curse. As the ghosts closed in, Daniel stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on the ground. His hand brushed against something sharp, a jagged rock. He grabbed it instinctively, ready to defend himself. Before he could swing it, the cabin ghost reached out, its icy fingers brushing his forehead. In an instant, Daniel was no longer in the woods. He stood in a dimly lit room, watching a scene unfold like a movie. An old man, his great-grandfather, stood over a table piled with gold coins. Across from him sat a man shrouded in shadow. "You'll have until the blood moon to repay your debt," the shadowy figure said. "Fail, and the woods will claim your kin one by one." The vision shifted. Daniel watched as his great-grandfather squandered the gold, never repaying the debt. Generations passed, and the curse followed, claiming lives in mysterious disappearances. Generations passed, and the curse followed, claiming lives in mysterious disappearances. The vision ended abruptly, snapping Daniel back to the woods. Understanding the truth, Daniel knew he couldn't simply run. The curse had to be ended, but how? The journal's warning echoed in his mind. No one escapes the woods. "I won't let this continue," Daniel muttered, determination hardening his voice. He returned to the cabin, the ghosts following at a distance. Inside, he found the journal and began flipping through its pages. Among the scribbled entries, he found instructions for a ritual to sever the curse. It required fire, blood, and the very pendant he had thrown into the river. With no time to waste, Daniel sprinted back to the riverbank. He plunged into the icy water, searching frantically. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel's fingers closed around the pendant. He emerged from the water, shivering but triumphant. Back at the cabin, he followed the ritual's instructions. He carved symbols into the dirt floor, lit a fire in the hearth, and placed the pendant in the flames. The ghosts surrounded him, their eyes glowing brighter. One stepped forward, placing a skeletal hand on his chest. "You'll pay the price," it rasped. Daniel gritted his teeth, slicing his palm and letting the blood drip onto the pendant. The fire roared, engulfing the cabin in blinding light. The ghosts screamed as the light intensified, their forms dissolving into wisps of smoke. The cabin trembled, the walls cracking and splintering. Daniel felt the curse pulling at him, trying to drag him into the flames. He clung to the doorway, fighting against the force. "I'm not part of this," he shouted. "It ends with me." The pendant shattered, releasing a deafening roar. The fire extinguished, plunging the cabin into silence. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was lying in a clearing. The cabin was gone, and the woods were bathed in soft morning light. The ghosts were gone, their presence lifted. For the first time in hours, Daniel felt peace. He stood, clutching the broken pendant in his hand. Though the curse was broken, he knew he'd carry the scars of the night forever. As he made his way out of the woods, he vowed to honor the lives lost to the curse, and to never forget the night he faced the hollow chase.